Hi, hello. Isn't it just amazing to see so many people and so much energy? This is a long, long way away from when I first came over here, I think 10 years ago. And I have to say, I'm not sure that we all really acknowledged how much Tony Leahy has contributed to all that. And it was just so wonderful to have him here and introducing the day. And he's just, I feel as though he's been so key to making this all happen. So the title of the conference is all about partnership, collaboration and co-production. And what I want to talk about is how this is the core of not your recovery-focused organisation, but the system. And I think we need to, all of us, extend our thinking onto the whole patch. For many of us, that's a new patch. We're talking about CHO areas which are, much bigger and bringing together different services. But also on every one of our geographical patches, we need to be thinking about all of the different resources that are there, not just mental health resources, not just primary care resources, not just social care resources, not just housing and employment resources. Think about all of the mainstream activities, the churches, the different spiritual and cultural spaces, the festivals, the libraries, all opportunities. Because, as we've heard already today, recovery doesn't happen in services. How many of us have got recovery goals which are about using services? Our recovery goals are about living lives, and lives happen out there in our communities with our friends, our families, our colleagues, our communities in all kinds of different ways. So I'm going to take you through, again, what are the definitions of co-production and the kind of differences that it makes. And I know that many of you, because we've already had one workshop on co-production today, so I know that huge numbers of you have got huge numbers of ideas about how to make this work and how it feels to be co-producing. But I want to be clear about why it's fundamental to recovery. And then I just want to take us through what it means for individuals, whether they're individuals who use services, individual family members, or individual members of staff, what it means for our services, and then what it means in terms of how we work in our larger communities. How we can make it happen is what we're talking about in the workshop. I'm not going to dig deeply into the hows and the problems and the challenges. That happens in the workshops. But I suppose the first thing to say is this is not about involvement. And sometimes we get confused between what's co-production and what is user involvement. I don't know whether any of you are familiar with Sherry Arnstein's ladder of participation, which takes us through levels of participation with service users starting right down at the bottom in systems which are quite coercive and manipulative, to therapy where there's an expert therapist who has all the knowledge, therapizing, treating somebody who's receiving that in a very passive way, up to actually giving people information and then consulting them, and then moving up to partnership and through into delegating power so that we're talking about user-led services. Now, that's one stream of activity, but that actually is not the same as co-production. Co-production is not actually about escalating and escalating the voices of people who use services and their families. Co-production is a very different skill set. This is about getting everybody who has something to contribute to an issue, a challenge, a problem, and actually hearing all of their voices, hearing all of their contributions. And you know that thing that says the whole is more than the sum of its parts, but it is the synergy that comes from having all of these different sets of expertise and experience working together in a facilitated way to come up with something new, better, and different. So definitions of co-production. So here we see the SCI, Social Centre for something or other. Anyway, SCI. SCI is a centre which is concerned with social care, and it's absolutely produced guidebooks and handbooks and all kinds of things around co-production. They call it, in 2012, a radical innovation. It challenges the conventional model of public services as a product that's delivered from on high, and instead genuinely devolves the power, the choice, and the control to frontline, not just the people receiving services, but the power goes to frontline practitioners as well. Now, I've put sick beside the word devolve because power is a very interesting thing, and I don't think it's something which you take from the top and you give to the bottom. It's something which you all build together. Importantly here is this challenging the word devolve, but the other thing is we have to realize this is about giving a voice to people who aren't usually involved in making these decisions, and actually we are as neglectful of the knowledge and experience and expertise of frontline practitioners as we are of people who use services. So how do we make sure that there's distributed leadership, that actually people from every level and every part of the system are involved? The second definition, which comes from a very different place, the London Design Council, is it means delivering public services in an equal and reciprocal, so that's giving and taking, relationship between professionals, people using services, their families, and communities. And where activities are co-produced in this way, services and communities become far more effective agents of change. And remember here that actually over the years, services have seen all the development happening within them, and services have become recognized as the experts in mental health. And that has de-skilled communities, it's de-skilled families. How many of you know that when somebody who you know becomes unwell, stops sleeping, they go straight to their GP? They don't go to families and friends and talk about what helps you. They don't go and sort out their issues in different community groups. They go to the perceived experts, when for many people, there is actually expertise around them, and we need to build up people's confidence and competence in supporting people with mental health problems in communities, not just in services. So co-production is not about them and us, and we are inviting you into our forums to advise us. We're involving you in our decision-making. It's not about us giving away some of our power and say we're now going to let people who use services have a bit of our power. It's about working together. It's about sharing power. So we increase the sum total of power. Power refers to the ability of people to get the things they want. And of course, to some extent, it's about resources, it's about information. But also it's about opportunities, it's about support, it's about facilitating coming together. It does involve understanding power, because actually one of the big challenges to co-production is that people are quite reluctant to get involved because they see it as giving away some power. So people are unwilling to allow people to participate in genuine decision-making because they fear that the people who they're asking are unable to make the right decisions. How can people with mental illness, mad people, how can they make valuable decisions? In fact, of course, they have expertise and experience based on what it feels like to use services, what it feels like to take medication, on what it feels like to be trapped in housing that you don't want to live in. But also, people are reluctant to share power because they fear loss of control themselves. There's that real sense of, actually, you know, I have a job here. I need to be on top of my job. I need to demonstrate that I can fix people. That's my job. And in fact, we need to shift that sense of understanding. Our job is not to fix people. Our job is to enable people to make decisions for themselves so that they can live the lives they want to live. The important thing is to remember is that it's not like there's a limited amount of power to go round. We can build the amount of power together. And there are so many situations when we work together, it does increase the power. It increases the ability for everybody to get what they want. And increasing that sum total of power is achieved through this process of co-production. So what are the elements of co-production within public organisations? You may well be familiar with these because these were defined by Nesta some years ago and have been used and reeled out in numerous places. But the first is that everybody is seen in terms of the contribution that they can make. Everybody, somebody coming into an acute ward still very distressed, can make a contribution, not only in terms of their own care, but they may well have some skills, some abilities which can then contribute to the way in which that unit's working. People in communities who are unemployed because of their own disabilities, because of their own family situations and so on, can still bring their expertise, their experiences, their interests to bear within developing that community. Everybody has something to give. Everybody has something to contribute. And the important thing is that we see that the capacity that we're counting in terms of developing our organizations, our healthcare organizations, exists often within communities. Within the communities that we sit, there are all kinds of people who want to give something back. People who are retired, people who are unemployed, people who are already working but actually have some capacity to volunteer, to support, to become a governor, to join a community of interest. So we really are trying to draw together to energize that capacity to contribute to a greater whole. And if we're talking about co-production, we don't always need to be looking for the answers in professionals. Just keep on burdening the professionals, keep on getting professionals to come and to do those extra pieces of work. Let's go out to people who've got different types of expertise. So we're looking to set up, for example, a midnight till 6 a.m. helpline for, say, young people who are feeling desperate in the night. Why does that need to be run by professionals? What people need during the night is somebody who can be with them, who can hear them, who can get them through those dark hours. They're not looking for professional treatment. So we can look for that kind of capacity within communities and within peer networks, not always from professionals. But within services, what do we need to do? And if we're working co-productively, we need to be changing that power balance so that once again, it's not about professionals or producers of the service, providers of the service having all the answers. It is about looking for new answers from people who use the service and family members. And this way, public services don't just keep on looking for how do we find the resources to keep on doing what we do, but actually we can facilitate change. We can become catalysts for change. So we can provide those contexts in which people can think in new ways. And we can have new people in those meetings with new experiences, new ideas, new expertise. And that means devolving some real responsibility to that front line, to those peer leaders, to community leaders, so they can start to have a say in how things are done differently. And if we are to work co-productively, we need to offer incentives. So there needs to be funding available for these partnerships, not just for HSE-led initiatives, but increasingly for partnerships where other types of community organisations, other peer organisations are leading on things. So there's a real incentive to embed this reciprocity. But it's not easy working in these ways. The workshop is around the challenges of really making sure that everybody's voices are heard, that we're not just all of us following our own simple, single solution, but we're actually prepared to have a dialogue, to find solutions together, to compromise, to listen, to hear, and to build something new. And what I want to do is think through what this means at the different levels. So an organisation that's co-productive has a very different culture to one which is professionally led. The culture is defined by the relationships which exist within the service. And this is not just the relationships between service providers and people using services, although that's very important in co-production. But it's really about those relationships being modelled in every interaction between managers and practitioners, between top-level directors and people using services. At every level and between every profession and between every stakeholder, we need to be demonstrating respectful, heedful relationships where we're listening, where we believe people's experiences, where we take on board people's suggestions. And the culture needs to be demonstrated in various ways. And it's not just about what it doesn't do. We need to be able to define what we're looking for. And there's tools that can do this. I don't know whether any of you have seen the 10-step challenge. It was invented by a mother of a child who was repeatedly hospitalized, and she said, wherever we go, I can tell you within 10 steps of that ward what kind of culture it's got. And she's actually produced just 10 questions where you can assess whether, in fact, what you find there is one that's co-productive, valuing, and although the word recovery isn't used, essentially recovery-focused. The organisation needs to have a different structure. And that means that actually in every decision-making forum, you're making sure that you've got all the right people with all the different types of expertise. So whether you're talking about your area management team or whether you're talking at, in your finance department or your corporate functions, wherever you're talking about, you need to bring in different types of expertise. You need to find the people with lived experience who also are familiar with the systems going on there. Now, you can't just pick up anybody who's used a service and say, come and advise us on finances. You actually need somebody who understands the language, who understands budgeting and accountancy, and has experience of using services so that they're willing to help you think in new ways. To do that, to have this different structure within an organisation, then you need to have more than your user forums. The user forums are a great place to start, but you need to have a database. You need to have all those people from your local communities who want to give something. You need to have access to who they are, what their expertise is, what their availability is, what they are interested in, how they want to get involved, whether they want to get paid. And then you recruit or select the right people for the right opportunity. It isn't as easy as just picking somebody at random. It needs to be carefully thought through about their role. And then there needs to be very different practices within the organisation so that all decisions are made in partnership between professionals and people who use services and family members, so that every decision is shared and is worked through in that partnership. And you know, what's interesting here is that many of your staff members will have their own lived experience. So we've done surveys of about 7 trusts in England, and we found that between 42 and 62% of staff working in mental health organisations have used secondary services, have used mental health services. The highest proportion of people who talked about those in their work was 10%, which shows that many staff, as Anne was saying this morning, either remain quite discriminating about mental illness, are quite worried about what it says about them if they talk about their own mental health problems, or they're worried about discrimination from other people. They're frightened about what it might mean for them. But that is experience which we can help people to talk about their own lived experience, and we can provide supports and structures whereby they can use that in their work. You don't always have to be recruiting people who continue to use services. You can actually use staff members who are already in post and get them to use that lived experience in the decisions that are being made. And then beyond that, we need to be reviewing and evaluating services differently. We need to be bringing that experience, that lived experience, into the way in which we measure outcomes, that kind of review, evaluation of our services through user-focused monitoring, through user experience-based outcome measures, through really developing the research skills of peers. And it's interesting, I've met the person I'm co-producing the co-production workshop is somebody who's a peer who's doing his PhD at the moment. Michael Watts there, done his PhD. There are very, very highly skilled peers in this room who could be really helpful in thinking about what does user-led service review look like. That's what it looks like at an organisational level, but what does it mean at a team level? What does co-production mean at team level? It does mean that we employ peer workers specifically to draw on their lived experience in their day-to-day work. Having people in your service who can talk to someone who is feeling utterly hopeless about where they go from here and say to them, a year ago, I too was in your position, is incredibly powerful in helping people believe in their own potential. You know, if you can do it, at least there's a chance that I could get on that same pathway. It's important to employ people explicitly and specifically who are trained to safely, appropriately, effectively use that experience. But also, it's important that professional staff are supported to use that experience in their own work. And what happens, as soon as you start to employ peer workers in your teams, you will find staff starting to talk to them, say, I've been there too, but I've never spoken about it. Or, I only talk to it with my caseload. I don't talk about it with any staff, but it's something I share. If people are going to share that, which they will, let's make sure we've got the structures to support them and train them to do that safely, appropriately, and effectively. At a team level, co-production means that all the groups that you run, all the courses that you run, are all co-produced and co-delivered. So why is a professional running the community group on their own within an inpatient ward? Why is a recovery course being run purely by staff? They all need to be co-produced. And there are people around who are willing and happy to contribute and help, but also make that a positive thing for them. This is part of them building up their confidence, building up their skills, getting a decent reference, helping them to build up their CV, helping them to work out what they want to do next. We also need to ensure that when people are recruited into services, that people with lived experience have a say, and I'm sure many of you are already doing that, that all staff training is co-produced and co-delivered, so that staff get the benefit of what it feels like to be on the receiving end of their administrations. The funny thing is, whenever you evaluate a training course where a person who's used services is talking about their experience, the staff will say, "That was fantastic, that was amazing, I learnt so much." And it always strikes me as odd because the staff are meeting them every single day in their practice, but it's because they're in a different role. Somebody standing at the front of the classroom as an expert saying, "This is what it feels like to be a patient," is listened to with different ears. And maybe having heard that, staff then go back and say, "I really am interested in listening harder to what people who use my services are saying." We need to introduce shared decision-making much more systematically. Shared decision-making is a very different and very clear way of working, so that whatever you're talking about, whether it is your care plan, it is the medication you're going to take, whether it's actually around planning discharge, all of that needs to be done on a basis of shared decision-making, where both the professional team and the person using the service and their family are contributing to a decision about what happens next. And all of it needs to be primarily around supporting the person to achieve their recovery goals. The staff will say often, "But we can't do that. All the documentation is just tick lists. It's all based on problems. It's all based on what we do next. It's all about us being accountable." Well, then let's co-produce some new documentation which gives space to the perspectives, the views, the goals of the people who use services. What does it mean at an individual level? Well, this is easy. This is about thinking, how would I like to be treated if I were using services? How would I like it to be? This isn't about, a service which takes away all of my choices, doesn't value my possessions, it doesn't value my choices, it doesn't value my wishes. It is about a service which is always respectful, treats people with dignity, believes in them, but also believes what they're saying they feel. It's about listening to their experience and their views and showing that you've heard them. It's absolutely, from the very, very beginning, very first contact, thinking together about people's recovery goals. The goal is not to get rid of these problems. It is to live in this way and to try to work out how to manage the things that get in the way of that. Some of the things that get in the way of that will be symptoms. There will be family relationships problems. There will be financial problems. There will be housing problems. But we don't just want to focus on symptoms, because when you're helping somebody live the lives they want to live in their communities, there's lots of other things to be working on as well. And of course, again, at an individual level, it's about being absolutely centered on that individual, on what they want, and on making decisions together. So we make our knowledge, what we know about what the research says, what other people have found helpful, what we might do if we're in their position. We make that available to them, but they then use that, the people we're working with use that to make a decision about what they want to happen next. And ways we can do that is to develop collaborative care plans. They are about shared decisions, to talk about shared safety plans. What can we do to help you feel safe? How are you going to let us know when you're feeling so distressed that you're not safe? How can we involve your family in this? How are we going to make sure this has the best chance of success? And then, of course, joint crisis plans. And if we really do help to work through joint crisis plans, advanced directives, we know that can reduce significantly the likelihood of being involuntarily admitted. And we also know the qualitative research around joint crisis plans is is just so interesting, because psychiatrists talking about using joint crisis plans said it totally changed their relationships with their patients. They started to hear what stopped them wanting to come in, what different medications feel like, and to plan something which they could assure people they'd stick to as far as possible. Finally, but perhaps the bit that we're least practiced at, we've thought through least, is what does co-production mean for communities? And it's only when we're really working in true partnership across the whole system that services are really embedded and networked in communities and giving people support to access opportunities to live the lives they want to lead. So we need to absolutely know who's out there, what's out there, who it's most suitable for. When are the swimming sessions most suitable for older women, say? What are the changing rooms like? You know, when are there hundreds of kids with floats in there, and when is it quite peaceful? Really working through with local people what is available. And all of us are accountable for knowing what's going on in our local communities. And then it is about finding those forums where we can go out and empower people and make them feel more confident, more competent about supporting each other. Families, friends, neighbours, employers. But it's also making sure that we are part of those community meetings, wherever they're happening, to try to bring our understanding of things and the people who use our services' understandings to bear within communities, so that understanding, fear and ignorance starts to be combated, stigma starts to reduce, opportunities increase. I think it is very, very much around bringing in those communities to help to inform where we go next. When I talk to local communities, and I'm talking about England here, it may be different because you know each other, you're a smaller population, you are more aware of what's going on. But whenever I go out into different community groups, they say, but it feels as though the health services door is locked. We just don't know how to get in. We don't know how to develop partnerships. So we need to be increasing the opportunities for those partnerships to be developed. And as we start to look for those partnerships, it takes some of the burden off services. So we stop trying to be everything to all people, and we start saying we're important when people are at their most distressed and disabled, but we can actually work with communities to support them as they go on towards their life goals. And that's how we co-produce transformation. And that's how we co-produce very new ways of doing things. So some of the most interesting novel approaches that are now being researched and showing great evidence are things like crisis cafes. Places that are run in the community, but where ambulances can take people in high distress to go and be with peer workers who can support them until they've made a decision about where to go next. Places like social prescribing, so that people, when they are calling to the crisis team, saying they're in crisis, and the crisis team, instead of saying you're not quite ill enough to come in yet, go away and get iller. They don't say that, but there is that sense that you won't get in unless you're worse. At that point, you can say, actually, we have got a team who can meet up with you tomorrow morning and talk about how you want to spend your day. We can talk particularly to the marginalised groups, to the ethnically the marginalised groups, from gypsy traveller groups, black and minority ethnic groups, from gay, lesbian, transsexual groups, people who at the moment aren't really engaging with our services very well, and start to work with them in a much more targeted way to make sure they're part of our service planning. I want to this is a really full slide, but I just want to tell you a bit about this because I'm very excited about it. So just recently I had an approach from some GPs who were saying, we're overwhelmed, they said, with chronic depressives. But we'll forgive them their language, maybe. They just said they're overwhelmed by the numbers of people who are going into the surgeries very, very frequently, who are very depressed, very lonely, inactive, not physically in a good place, don't know, just can't imagine being able to get to the leisure centre, haven't got many friends or family. And they said to me, we've got funding available if you can find any way of spending it. And so the first thing that I did was just to set up a meeting the following week where I put up posters, and we got about 30 community groups to come into a room together and spent a day talking about this, we identified what the problem was. And I started by saying, you know, some people have found ways around this and presented some evidence about what has worked elsewhere. But as I presented each thing, on each table, they had a little discussion, and we'd got the dementia-friendly community crew saying, we can do more of that, we could do this. We'd got the Baptist Church saying, we run a cafe in this place, and it just offers support for people like that. We got Notts County football team saying, we already offer mental health coaching, perhaps we could do more. We could open up coaching and physical exercise advice for more people. We've got the ambulance service saying, we've now got a mental health worker who just focuses on frequent callers, and they fall into this category, so we'd love to have something to offer them. And as we went through the day, we built up a scaffolding. So what we want, and the GPs were in the room as well, what we decided we wanted was for GPs to be able to, when they meet people who fit this kind of profile, to say, do you know, downstairs we've got people who have been through the same kind of challenges as you, but they're happy to talk to you about ways you could start to feel better. And from there, those people will then be available to take them and to go and help them to do the things which they might previously have enjoyed, which they might imagine being able to attend. And alongside them, we call them community connectors. They sound like electric devices, but they are kind of connecting into communities. We then said, well, this Baptist church has actually got some funding and they want to set up more cafes. So why don't, in the same places as these GP practices sit, we actually start to develop some cafes? And the Recovery College was there saying, we could run courses on mental health one day a week in these cafes. And Notts County was saying, we could actually come along and do some sports advice one day a week in those cafes. And then we'd got peer volunteers in the room saying, but maybe we could just be in the cafe and help people. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I wrote a proposal, and we've just got £500,000 to try this out in 3 GP practices. So that is co-production at a community level. But I really just wanted to kind of inspire you to think that actually I've got a lot of money because I'll be employing a lot of people, but the vast majority of the contribution is coming from communities, from people who want to be part of something, and they're not actually asking for funding. They're saying, we want to do this. The churches, retired women saying, oh, I'd love to go and help out in that cafe. You know, so I just think we need to think about possibilities in a very new way, really. And I'll tell you how that goes on, because it's just starting now. I suppose what I want to say, a co-production is synergy in practice. This is about taking the individual parts and making something bigger, different, better, and more cost-effective. It increases the sum total of power, possibility, and potential. It's not about taking power away from this group and giving it to another. It is about defining all the contributions in the room and making the most of everybody. And it does open up new ideas, new innovations. You hear new things from different perspectives. It is actually the foundation of the new economics of healthcare. Do you know, in the trust that I work in, £20 million has to be saved this year. And the way in which that's going to be saved is by looking at these new, innovative, much more community-based services. A massive challenge. But unless we cut that 20 million, it will be just taken. You know, we have to find out how to do that. And you will recognise the kind of elements of what I'm talking about. We know that you've got little social prescribing projects in Ireland. You've got recovery colleges which are working in partnership with communities. You've got peer support workers who are really engaging people into community opportunities. But it's about continuing to build those relationships. It's about dropping defences. It's about opening yourself up to possibility, but not just knee-jerk reactions. Build on evidence and keep on adding to that evidence. So alongside whatever you're doing, you need to keep on evaluating, keep on adding to the evidence base so this can be shared and built upon. So thank you, and we're going to dig further into the challenges and the downsides in the workshop.
I suppose co-production it's really what it's all about, and co-production is key to recovery, and co-production is our theme for the day. And we're talking about co-production, and myself and Catherine are working together in the spirit of co-production. An interesting fact for you, Catherine is actually working in the mental health services for 37 years. And I am a family member for 37 years. So there's an interesting fact, yeah. So it's just bringing both experiences. I am 37, yeah. In September, I have another few months. So my mum had a mental health difficulty, and but yeah, so working in the spirit of co-production, and we were at the international conference for integrated care last week. Catherine, Michael, myself, and Margaret, who's doing the involvement centre. Hands up, Margaret, I can see you there. Yeah, who's doing the involvement centre workshop, and. They had an artist to do an impression of some of the workshops, and they stole Margaret's quote from it as the highlight for the artist's impression of the workshop. And her quote was, you know, we can't just be token storytellers. And I just thought that was brilliant. You know, you can't just kind of pop the person up in the room, tell your story, and off you go. As you were saying, you know, quite often it's amazing when people say, God, it was really great to hear their story, you know, and you're kind of saying, but you must be listening to the stories every day, you know. So, but yeah, so I'm very happy to welcome you to my hometown. So it's Kilkenny obviously is my hometown, and it's, you know, we're no stranger to visitors here in Kilkenny. Only last week we had Prince Charles over to meet with King Henry. So, and I'll leave the hurling at that, because I'll have a Tipperary woman coming up now in a minute. So that's enough with the hurling. But what we wanted to do was just to take a little tour around the country, just of what has been going on within all the counties, because there is so much going on, and I hope that that's really evident from today, because quite often when you're working in your area, it's quite difficult maybe to see, you know, is it changing? Are we making a difference? And we hope that just by bringing everybody together today, that you can really see that there is changes happening, and just to keep up the motivation and to continue with the work. That's what we really kind of want from today. So we're going to start off with CHO1, and I'm really just going to bring up the highlights, but all of this will be fed into the evaluation process that we've been mentioning today, and it is so important that we keep building on that. So I'm only going to pick one. They're up here on the screen, but I'm only going to pick one highlight, and we've literally just gone through all the feedback that has come back from all the sites. You've sent it back, and thank you very much, and we're just going to pick out highlights. So you mightn't necessarily pick out the thing that I've picked out from your area, but we wanted to just show a cross-section of all the activity and try and represent all the activity. So Cavan Monaghan Consumer Panel established through ARI with representation on all management meetings. Sligo Leitrim linked with recovery consultants. Donegal service user, family member and service provider leads in place. Moving on to CHO2, Regari Recovery College in Roscommon, Galway, co-produced Recovery for Teams module in Mayo. CHO3, ARI's Community Recovery Education Service and Recovery Education Needs Analysis to go alongside that. So again, it's just really just picking the highlights from the areas just to show the vast amount of work, because again, each area is at a different level on the recovery journey, you know, so it's just to show, I suppose, that there really is so much going on. CHO4, Cork, we're looking at CHO-wide Recovery Steering Committee. Kerry have their own ARI newsletter. Kilkenny and South Tipperary, 2 involvement centres and a family peer support service. Waterford, Wexford, very strong group with good attendance and structure. CHO6 then, so Recovery Committee established. Moving on to CHO7 then, so Kildare and West Wicklow, good links with external partners. Dublin West, South West and South Inner City, Service Reform Fund members on the ARI committee. So again, it's just picking the highlights just to represent the vast amount of work that's going on everywhere. CHO8 then, Loudmead discharge booklet designed. Laois Offaly, building capacity through DCU learning course and recovery principles facilitation. Longford Westmead, invitation sent to all stakeholders to begin that process. CHO9, the introduction to recovery principles training for all teams. and North Dublin, the team recovery implementation plan. So it's just really just to pick something to represent each and every area, because there is a huge amount of work going on there, and I just hope that it will just help to continue with the motivation levels, to keep up the work that's going on, and to help people then just to learn from other areas, not to reinvent the wheel and that. And then for the Central Mental Hospital, it's so good to have you represented as well. And just to pick one from their area, the steering group with 3 working groups has already been established. So Catherine is going to come up now and give us just a little update and say the thank yous as well.
The next clap is for, I mean, what you saw up there was just a sample of the templates that every single service across the country filled out and sent back. And I think each and every one of you need to give yourselves a hand of applause for the hard work that is happening in every service. We're all at different stages, but we will get there bit by bit, and you can see today there's strength in us being and working together. So a big round of applause for yourselves. I'm not going to do the ARI update because I'm conscious that I want your butts back out there looking at what's going on around the country and bragging and stealing, and as well that you get back into the workshops and that we don't lose the time on it, because that's where the real learning is. But just to say that I'm really so proud of everybody that's been involved in ARI right across the country, who've contributed to, we finally have our facilitators manual for our recovery principle and practice workshop. I think it's a fantastic piece of work. It comes on the back of 2 years of testing, trialling and reviewing, and finally being able to collate it into an evidence-based recovery workshop for 4 hours, basic principles around recovery that we want every single member of every team to participate in. We have 12 of our services across the country now have recovery facilitators, and in September we will be targeting the services who are just coming on new, so that ye get capacity to be able to deliver this in your own service. Everybody gets their lanyard and their USB key, which carries every bit of information that you'll need to deliver it as well. So I'm not going to go into anything else, but I do really want to say a special thanks to, and Tony wasn't in the room when Julie said it, but to Tony Leahy, because today wouldn't happen without him. And he's at the back of the room, so we can give him. And I think Tony will agree that from the small little tiny mustard seed, and mustard seeds, they say are, and I could be wrong, and someone will probably say I'm wrong, but isn't mustard seed supposed to be one of the smallest seeds? And that out of it, though, you get so much growing. And that's what we're doing. We're cross-pollinating, we're working together, we're coordinating what's happening around the country, and it began with a conversation that started with Tony.